The black Range Rover moved slowly through the busy London streets, its windows tinted dark enough to hide the precious cargo inside. Behind the wheel sat Detective Inspector James Morrison, one of the most trusted drivers in the Royal Protection Unit. He had been driving members of the royal family for over 15 years, but today felt different. Today, the whole world would be watching. In the back seat, Prince William adjusted his navy blue suit jacket for the third time in 10 minutes. His wife Catherine sat beside him, looking elegant in a deep emerald dress that brought out her eyes. She was checking her appearance in a small mirror, making sure every strand of her chestnut hair was perfectly in place. Between them, their youngest child, Louis, fidgeted with the buttons on his smart little blazer. "Daddy, why are there so many people?" Louis asked, pressing his small face against the window. Outside, crowds lined the streets despite the early morning hour. Some had been waiting since dawn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. William smiled at his son's curiosity. "They've come to see us, Louis. Today is very special." He reached over and straightened the boy's tie, which had somehow become crooked during the short journey from Kensington Palace. Catherine turned from her mirror and looked at her husband with those knowing eyes that had captured his heart all those years ago at university. She could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set just a little too firmly. Public events like this always made him nervous, though he would never admit it. The weight of representing the monarchy, of carrying on his grandmother's legacy, sometimes felt overwhelming. "You look handsome," she whispered to him, placing her gloved hand gently on his arm. The simple touch seemed to relax him immediately. In the front passenger seat, their personal protection officer, Sarah Chen, spoke quietly into her radio headset. She was coordinating with the security teams already positioned around Westminster Abbey. Every entrance had been checked twice. Every face in the crowd would be scanned, every possible threat assessed and neutralized before the royal family even stepped out of the car. The morning had started early at Kensington Palace. Catherine had been awake since 5:30, going through her morning routine with the precision of someone who had learned that every public appearance mattered. The dress had been chosen weeks ago, approved by the palace stylists, and fitted 3 times to ensure it was perfect. The jewelry was a careful selection from the royal collection, pieces that would photograph well, but not overshadow the solemnity of the occasion. William had spent the early hours reviewing his speech notes, one final time. As second in line to the throne, his words carried weight far beyond their literal meaning. Every phrase would be analyzed by the media, every gesture scrutinized by royal watchers around the globe. He had learned long ago that being royal meant living in a fishbowl, but some days the glass felt thicker than others. The children had been more challenging to prepare. George, their eldest, understood the importance of these occasions now that he was older. He stood still while his nanny helped him into his formal wear and reminded him of the proper way to walk and where to look when the cameras were flashing. Charlotte, their daughter, had insisted on wearing her favorite hair ribbon, and after a brief negotiation, Catherine had agreed it would be acceptable. But Louis, at his young age, still saw these events as adventures rather than duties. He had asked 100 questions during breakfast, wanted to know why he couldn't bring his favorite toy car, and had to be gently reminded twice about using his indoor voice even when excited. As the Range Rover turned the final corner toward Westminster Abbey, the noise from the crowds grew louder. Even through the bulletproof glass and reinforced doors, they could hear the cheers and shouts of "William" and "Kate" from the people lining the barriers. Photographers with long lenses jostled for position, their cameras already clicking in anticipation. Detective Inspector Morrison spoke into his radio. "Eagle approaching nest. ETA 2 minutes." Eagle was William's code name, chosen years ago and used by all his protection officers. Catherine was Duchess, and the children had their own special names known only to the security team. The Abbey's ancient spires came into view, and William felt that familiar mixture of pride and responsibility wash over him. This building had witnessed over 1,000 years of British history. His own wedding to Catherine had taken place here, watched by 2 billion people around the world. Today would add another chapter to that long story. Catherine noticed her husband's mood shift and squeezed his hand. After more than a decade of marriage, she could read his thoughts almost before he had them. She knew he was thinking about his grandmother, about his father, about the long line of royals who had walked through those same doors. The weight of history and expectation was something she had learned to carry too. "Ready?" she asked softly as the car began to slow. William looked at his wife, then back at his 3 children, and felt a surge of gratitude for this life they had built together. Despite all the challenges, all the scrutiny, all the pressure, they were still a family first and foremost. "Ready?" he replied and meant it. The car came to a complete stop in front of Westminster Abbey's great west door, and immediately the world outside exploded into action. Camera flashes created a strobing light show that could be seen even through the tinted windows. The roar of the crowd intensified, with voices calling out greetings in dozens of different languages from tourists who had traveled from around the globe for this moment. Detective Inspector Morrison kept his hand steady on the steering wheel until he received the all-clear from Sarah Chen. She pressed her earpiece firmly and listened to the rapid-fire updates from the security teams positioned throughout the area. Snipers on nearby rooftops reported clear sightlines. Undercover officers mixed in with the crowd confirmed no suspicious activity. The path from car to Abbey entrance had been secured and double-checked. "Green light," Sarah announced, and Morrison immediately stepped out of the driver's seat. The protocol for royal arrivals had been refined over decades to run like clockwork. Morrison moved to the rear passenger door while 2 additional protection officers emerged from a second vehicle that had been following close behind. They formed a loose triangle around the royal car, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd and surrounding buildings. Inside the Range Rover, the family made their final preparations. Catherine took one last look in her compact mirror and tucked it away in her small clutch bag. She had learned years ago that once she stepped outside, there would be no opportunity for touch-ups until they were back in private. Every photograph taken in the next few minutes would be analyzed and shared millions of times across social media platforms around the world. William unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at his children. George sat up straighter, understanding the gravity of the moment. At his age, he had attended enough royal events to know what was expected. Charlotte smoothed down her dress and checked that her special hair ribbon was still perfectly positioned. Louis, however, was still fascinated by the crowd outside and kept trying to wave at people through the tinted glass. "Remember what we practiced?" Catherine said gently to all 3 children. "Walk slowly, smile, and stay close to Mummy and Daddy." The Abbey's bells had begun to chime, their ancient bronze voices carrying across London and announcing to the city that something significant was about to unfold. The sound seemed to quiet the crowd momentarily, as if everyone paused to listen to the historic bells that had marked important moments in British history for centuries. Detective Inspector Morrison positioned himself at the car door, his hand on the handle. He had done this hundreds of times, but each occasion still required perfect timing and coordination. Too fast, and the photographers wouldn't get the shots they needed, which could lead to pushing and chaos as they tried for better angles. Too slow, and the royal family would be exposed longer than necessary to potential security risks. Through his earpiece, he heard the countdown from the event coordinator inside the Abbey. 30 seconds to arrival. All positions confirm ready. One by one, voices crackled through the radio network confirming that every person involved in the security and protocol operation was in position and ready. William reached for Catherine's hand and gave it a quick squeeze. This simple gesture, barely visible to anyone outside the car, was their private moment of connection before stepping into their public roles. In a few seconds, they would belong to the nation and the watching world. Their expressions, their body language, even the way they looked at each other, would be scrutinized and interpreted by royal watchers and media commentators. The crowd noise reached a crescendo as people began to realize the car doors were about to open. Children sitting on their parents' shoulders pointed excitedly. Elderly royal fans who had been following the family for years leaned forward in their wheelchairs and mobility scooters. Tourists held their phones high, hoping to capture the perfect shot to share with friends back home. Sarah Chen spoke one final time into her radio. "Royal arrival commencing now." Her words were transmitted instantly to police commanders throughout central London, to palace officials monitoring the event from their offices, and to television producers preparing to broadcast the arrival live to audiences around the world. The moment had arrived. Morrison pulled the door handle and stepped back as the door swung open. The sounds that had been muffled inside the armored vehicle suddenly became crystal clear. The cheering was deafening. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession, creating a mechanical symphony that accompanied the human voices. Someone in the crowd shouted, "We love you," in a voice that carried above all the rest. William emerged first, as protocol dictated. The moment his polished black shoe touched the red carpet that had been laid out for their arrival, a fresh wave of excitement rippled through the assembled crowd. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand briefly through his hair, and turned back toward the car to help his wife. Catherine appeared next, her emerald dress catching the morning light beautifully. She moved with the grace that had made her one of the most photographed women in the world, but there was nothing artificial about her smile. This was genuine happiness at seeing the enthusiastic reception from people who had made the effort to come out and greet them. The children followed, George first with his serious expression that made him look so much like his father at that age. Charlotte emerged with a little wave that delighted the crowd and caused a fresh burst of camera clicking. Finally, Louis stepped out, his eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle surrounding him. As the royal family stood together on the red carpet, for just a moment adjusting to the noise and activity around them, Westminster Abbey's great doors opened wide to welcome them home. The massive oak doors of Westminster Abbey swung open as if moved by invisible hands, revealing the breathtaking interior that had hosted coronations, royal weddings, and state occasions for nearly 1,000 years. The Dean of Westminster, Dr. Matthew Harrison, stood waiting in his ceremonial robes, flanked by 2 junior clergy members who would assist with the day's proceedings. William took Catherine's arm in the traditional manner, and together they began their measured walk up the red carpet toward the Abbey entrance. Behind them, the children fell into step with the natural rhythm they had practiced during rehearsals at Kensington Palace. George walked with his hands clasped behind his back, a posture that made him look remarkably mature for his age. Charlotte maintained perfect posture while still managing to catch glimpses of the crowd, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Louis tried his best to copy his older siblings but couldn't resist giving a small wave when someone called his name. The photographers pressed forward against the barriers, their long lenses tracking every step of the royal family's progress. Among them was veteran royal photographer Marcus Wellington, who had been covering the monarchy for over 30 years. He had photographed William as a baby in his mother's arms, captured his first day of school, and documented every major milestone in his life. Today, through his viewfinder, he watched another generation of royals taking their place in history. Beautiful family, Marcus murmured to himself as he adjusted his camera settings to account for the changing light, as the royals moved from bright sunlight into the shadowed entrance of the Abbey.
He had seen William grow from a shy boy devastated by his mother's death into a confident man who carried the weight of future kingship with dignity and grace. As the family approached the Abbey steps, the noise from the crowd began to fade slightly,
replaced by the ancient silence that seemed to emanate from the building itself. Westminster Abbey had that effect on people. No matter how grand the occasion or how excited the atmosphere, there was something about stepping into its shadow that demanded respect and reverence. Catherine felt the familiar awe she always experienced when entering the Abbey. This was where she had become a princess, where she had promised to love William for better or worse in front of 2 billion television viewers. The memories of that day came flooding back, the weight of her dress, the sound of the organ, the moment when William had whispered, "You look beautiful," just before they exchanged rings. Dr. Harrison stepped forward to greet them, his face showing the warm smile that had made him beloved by both the royal family and the general public since his appointment as dean. He had officiated at several royal occasions and understood perfectly how to balance the formal requirements of protocol with the genuine warmth that made these events feel personal and meaningful. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said, bowing his head respectfully. "Welcome to Westminster Abbey. We are honored by your presence today." William shook the dean's hand firmly. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison. We're delighted to be here." His voice carried clearly despite the ambient noise from outside, trained by years of public speaking to project authority and warmth simultaneously. The children were introduced to the dean with the careful politeness their parents had instilled in them. George offered a small bow that was perfectly executed. Charlotte curtsied beautifully, something she had been practicing with her nanny for weeks. Louis, not quite sure what was expected of him, settled for his biggest smile and an enthusiastic, "Hello." Behind the royal family, their small entourage began to gather. Private Secretary Amanda Mills carried the briefing folders that contained the day's detailed schedule, backup speeches, and contact information for every person they would meet. Royal Protection Officer David Kumar maintained his position where he could watch both the family and the crowd, his trained eyes constantly assessing potential threats while trying to remain invisible to the photographers. The Abbey's interior stretched out before them like a stone cathedral of British history. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows that had witnessed the crowning of kings and queens, the marriages of princes and princesses, and the funerals of prime ministers and poets. The Poets' Corner held the remains of Geoffrey Chaucer, Charles Dickens, and dozens of other literary giants. The Lady Chapel housed the tomb of Elizabeth the Mere, and somewhere beneath their feet lay the bones of Edward the Confessor, the Abbey's founder. As they paused in the entrance, Catherine noticed how Louis was staring up at the soaring ceiling with his mouth slightly open in wonder. The Gothic arches seemed to reach impossibly high, decorated with intricate stone carvings that had been crafted by medieval artisans whose names were lost to history, but whose work lived on in every delicate detail. "It's big," Louis whispered. To his mother, his young voice filled with amazement. Catherine smiled and bent down slightly to whisper back, "Yes, it is. This building is older than anything you can imagine. Kings and queens have walked where we're walking for hundreds and hundreds of years." The dean gestured toward the nave, where distinguished guests were already seated and waiting. "Shall we proceed, Your Royal Highnesses? I believe everyone is eager to begin." William nodded and offered his arm to Catherine once again. As they took their first steps into the Abbey proper, the massive space seemed to envelop them in its ancient embrace. Their footsteps echoed softly on stones that had been worn smooth by centuries of visitors, from medieval pilgrims to modern tourists, to royalty from around the world. The organ began to play softly, its majestic voice filling every corner of the Abbey with music that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The sound was both triumphant and reverent, perfectly capturing the significance of the moment, as Britain's future king and queen walked deeper into the heart of their nation's history, their children beside them, ready to play their part in the continuing story of the monarchy. The nave of Westminster Abbey stretched out before the royal family like a magnificent stone corridor leading to the altar. Hundreds of distinguished guests rose to their feet as William, Catherine, and their children made their stately progress down the aisle. The guest list read like a who's who of British society: government ministers, military leaders, charitable organization heads, and representatives from the Commonwealth nations. In the front row, sitting with perfect posture despite her advanced age, was Lady Margaret Thornbury, the Queen's former lady-in-waiting who had served the royal family for over 50 years. She watched William walk past and remembered him as a toddler, running through the palace corridors while his nanny chased after him. Now here he was, every inch the future king, with his own children following in his footsteps. The Abbey's acoustics carried every sound with crystal clarity: the soft rustle of Catherine's silk dress, the gentle tap of William's leather shoes on the ancient stones, even the whispered wow from Louis as he spotted the elaborate tomb of a medieval king were all audible to those seated nearby. Charlotte walked with her chin slightly raised, having been taught by her mother that good posture was essential for a princess, while George maintained the serious expression that had become his signature at public events. Halfway down the aisle, they passed the tomb of the unknown warrior, marked by a simple slab of black marble that honored all those who had died in service to their country. William slowed his pace almost imperceptibly as they passed, a gesture of respect that did not go unnoticed by the military personnel in attendance. This subtle acknowledgement of sacrifice and service was exactly the kind of moment that made people admire him as a future monarch who understood the weight of his responsibilities. The Dean of Westminster had positioned himself at the altar, watching the royal family's approach with satisfaction. He had worked closely with palace officials for weeks to ensure every detail of today's ceremony would run smoothly. The timing had been rehearsed, the seating arrangements carefully planned, and even the lighting adjusted to ensure the best possible conditions for the photographers and television cameras that would share this moment with the world. As they neared the front of the Abbey, Catherine caught sight of some familiar faces in the congregation. Several of her friends from university days had received invitations, including Sarah Mitchell, who had been her roommate and had introduced her to William at a party all those years ago. Sarah gave her a discreet smile and a tiny wave, a moment of personal connection that helped Catherine feel grounded, despite the formal grandeur surrounding them. The children were beginning to show signs of the long walk and the overwhelming nature of the occasion. Charlotte's initial excitement was giving way to a more subdued awareness of how many people were watching her every move. George remained stoic, but Catherine could see the slight tension in his small shoulders that indicated he was working hard to maintain his composure. Louis, true to his age, was starting to lose interest in walking slowly and properly, his natural energy beginning to assert itself. William noticed his youngest son's restlessness and made a small adjustment to their pace, speeding up just slightly to help Louis maintain focus. This kind of instant adaptation to his family's needs, even in the middle of a formal state occasion, was something Catherine had always admired about her husband. He never let protocol override his instincts as a father. The organ music swelled as they approached their designated seats in the front row of the Abbey. The piece being played was Hubert Parry's I Was Glad, a composition that had become synonymous with royal occasions and never failed to stir emotions in those who heard it performed in this magnificent setting. The Abbey's acoustics transformed, the music into something transcendent, notes seeming to float down from the Gothic arches high above. Behind the royal family, their small procession of staff and security personnel found their own assigned positions with military precision. Private Secretary Amanda Mills took her seat where she could observe the proceedings while remaining ready to handle any unexpected issues. The royal protection officers positioned themselves strategically around the Abbey, maintaining their vigilance while trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible during the ceremony. As William guided his family to their seats, he felt a profound sense of continuity with the past. His grandparents had sat in these same chairs for countless occasions. His parents had been here for their own ceremonies and celebrations. Now he was creating new memories with his own children, adding another layer to the rich tapestry of royal history that was woven into every stone of this remarkable building. Catherine helped Louis settle into his seat, quietly reminding him to sit up straight and keep his hands folded. She could see that he was trying his best to be good, but she also knew that asking a young child to sit still and quiet through an entire formal ceremony was a significant challenge. She caught William's eye, and they shared one of those wordless communications that long-married couples perfect, agreeing that they would handle whatever childish moments might arise with patience and understanding. The last notes of the organ piece faded into silence, and Westminster Abbey fell quiet except for the gentle sounds of hundreds of people settling into their seats. The ceremony was about to begin, and the royal family was ready to fulfill their role in this latest chapter of the monarchy's enduring story. Outside, thousands more people waited patiently behind barriers, hoping to catch another glimpse of the family when they emerged. But for now, all attention was focused on the ancient altar where British history continued to unfold. The ceremony unfolded with the precision and grace that had made Westminster Abbey famous throughout the world. Dr. Harrison's voice carried clearly through the vast space as he delivered opening remarks that acknowledged not only the significance of the occasion but also the deep history of the building that surrounded them. His words seemed to resonate with extra meaning in this place where so many pivotal moments in British history had occurred. William listened attentively, his hands folded in his lap, occasionally glancing at his children to ensure they were managing well. George sat with remarkable stillness for someone his age, clearly understanding the importance of good behavior during such a formal event. Charlotte fidgeted slightly, but remained within acceptable bounds, occasionally smoothing her dress or touching her hair ribbon to make sure everything was still perfect. Louis presented the biggest challenge, as everyone had expected. About 20 minutes into the ceremony, he began to swing his legs back and forth, the motion becoming more pronounced as he grew bored with the formal proceedings. Catherine placed a gentle but firm hand on his knee, a subtle reminder that brought him back to appropriate behavior without drawing unwanted attention from the photographers. The Abbey's famous choir began to sing, their voices lifting to the soaring ceiling in harmonies that had been perfected over centuries of performance. The music seemed to transform the already magnificent space into something even more ethereal and moving. Several guests could be seen wiping away tears as the ancient melodies filled their hearts with emotion that words could never adequately capture. During a particularly beautiful passage, Catherine found herself thinking about all the times she had sat in this same abbey for various royal occasions. Her wedding day, of course, was the most memorable, but there had been memorial services, Thanksgiving ceremonies, and celebrations of national milestones. Each time, she felt the same sense of awe at being part of something so much larger than herself, so connected to the long story of Britain and its people. The children were handling the lengthy ceremony better than many adults might have managed. Charlotte had discovered that if she focused on the colorful stained glass windows, she could keep herself entertained by trying to identify all the different scenes depicted in the intricate artwork. The windows told stories from the Bible and British history, with kings and saints and angels all rendered in brilliant blues, reds, and golds that caught and scattered the morning sunlight. George had adopted a strategy of listening carefully to every word, treating the ceremony like a lesson in history and protocol that he would need to understand as he grew older. Even at his young age, he was beginning to grasp the weight of his future role as heir to the throne. His serious expression during public events wasn't just natural personality. It was the beginning of his understanding that being royal meant carrying responsibilities that other children his age would never face. When it came time for William to deliver his brief address to the congregation, he stood with the confidence that came from years of public speaking experience. His voice was strong and clear as he spoke about service, duty, and the continuing relevance of the monarchy in
modern Britain.
The words had been carefully crafted by palace speechwriters, but William's delivery made them feel personal and heartfelt, rather than merely formal. Catherine watched her husband with pride as he spoke. She had seen him grow from a sometimes reluctant public figure into someone who genuinely embraced his role as a future king. His comfort with public speaking had developed gradually over their years of marriage, helped by her quiet encouragement and the confidence that came from knowing his family supported him completely. Louis chose the moment during his father's speech to whisper loudly, "Is Daddy finished talking yet?" The question was audible to several nearby guests and even picked up by the sensitive microphones positioned throughout the Abbey. Catherine quickly leaned over to whisper back, "Soon, sweetheart. Just a little bit longer." The brief exchange was exactly the kind of humanizing moment that made the royal family relatable to ordinary parents, dealing with their own children's attention spans. The ceremony continued with readings from distinguished guests, including a member of Parliament, who spoke about the importance of public service, and a representative from one of the charitable organizations that the royal family supported. Each speaker had been carefully chosen to represent different aspects of British society and the monarchy's connection to the people they served. As the formal proceedings drew toward their conclusion, the Abbey's atmosphere seemed to grow even more reverent. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows had shifted, creating new patterns of color on the ancient stones and highlighting different architectural details that had been in shadow earlier. This interplay of light and stone was one of the Abbey's most magical qualities, the way it seemed to change and reveal new beauty throughout the day. The final hymn was Jerusalem, that stirring anthem that never failed to move British hearts, whether sung at sporting events or in cathedral settings like this. The entire congregation stood and sang together, their voices joining with the professional choir in a moment of shared national pride and spiritual connection that transcended all the formal protocols and careful planning that had brought them to this moment. As the last notes faded away, Dr. Harrison stepped forward for the closing benediction. The ceremony was nearly over, but the impact of what had taken place in this sacred space would continue to resonate long after the royal family had returned to their car and driven back through the London streets to Kensington Palace. The closing benediction marked the end of the formal ceremony, but for the royal family the day's obligations were far from over. As Dr. Harrison pronounced the final blessing, William and Catherine exchanged a quick glance that spoke volumes about their shared understanding of what came next. There would be a receiving line, formal photographs, brief conversations with distinguished guests, and then the carefully choreographed exit that would give the waiting crowds outside another opportunity to see them. Louis had reached the absolute limit of his patience with sitting still and being quiet. As soon as the benediction ended and people began to stir in their seats, he tugged on his mother's dress and whispered urgently, "Mommy, can we go home now?" His innocent question drew smiles from nearby guests who had children of their own and understood exactly how he was feeling. Catherine bent down to his level and whispered back, "Just a little bit longer, darling. We need to say goodbye to some people first, and then we'll go home for lunch." She smoothed his hair, which had become slightly disheveled despite his relatively good behavior throughout the ceremony. The receiving line formed with the efficiency that came from decades of royal protocol experience. Distinguished guests approached, in order of precedence, each person having exactly the right amount of time for pleasantries, without allowing the line to become too long or the royal family to become overtired. William and Catherine had perfected the art of making each brief conversation feel personal and meaningful, even when they might speak to 50 or 60 people in rapid succession. George and Charlotte stood beside their parents during the receiving line, occasionally being introduced to particularly important guests. They had been coached on the proper responses, a small bow or curtsy, a polite "how do you do," and perhaps a comment about the weather or how nice it was to meet someone. Both children performed these interactions with remarkable grace, though Charlotte's natural chattiness occasionally extended conversations a bit longer than protocol might have preferred. Meanwhile, Louis had been taken aside by his nanny, who had appeared as if by magic with a small snack and a quiet activity to help him decompress from the intensity of the formal ceremony. This kind of seamless support for the family's needs was part of the elaborate planning that went into every royal event, ensuring that even the youngest members of the family could participate appropriately without becoming overwhelmed. The Abbey's staff moved efficiently to prepare for the family's departure. The red carpet was checked and straightened. Security officers confirmed that the route to the car remained clear, and photographers outside were reminded of the designated areas where they could position themselves for the best shots of the family's exit. As the receiving line concluded, Dr. Harrison approached for a final private word with William and Catherine. "Thank you both for your gracious presence today," he said warmly. "The ceremony was beautiful and your children were absolutely delightful." The congregation was quite charmed by young Louis's whispered questions. William laughed softly. "I'm afraid he's reached his limit for formal occasions today. We're very grateful for everyone's patience with him." "Nonsense," Dr. Harrison replied. "A little humanity makes these events all the more meaningful. It reminds us that beneath all the ceremony and tradition, you're a family just like any other, dealing with the same challenges of raising children well." Catherine appreciated the dean's understanding perspective. One of the constant pressures of royal life was the expectation that they should appear perfect at all times, never showing the normal struggles that all parents faced. Moments like this, when someone acknowledged their humanity rather than criticizing, it meant more than most people realized. The time had come for the formal photographs that would appear in newspapers and magazines around the world. The Abbey's photographer positioned the family in front of one of the most beautiful architectural features, ensuring that the lighting was perfect and that all their faces were clearly visible. The children had been through this process enough times to know exactly where to stand and how to smile, though Louis required a bit of coaxing to look at the camera rather than at the interesting tomb sculpture that had caught his attention. "Just a few more pictures," the photographer said, encouragingly, "and then you can go see all those people waiting outside." He had worked with the royal family many times and understood that keeping the children engaged required making the process feel like an adventure rather than a chore. Finally, it was time for the exit that the crowds outside had been patiently waiting to see. The family gathered at the great west doors, taking a moment to prepare themselves for the renewed intensity of public attention. The noise from outside was clearly audible even through the thick oak doors. Thousands of people chatting, children calling out, and the constant click and whir of camera equipment. William picked up Lewis, who had been asking to be carried, and had clearly earned the privilege after his mostly good behavior during the long ceremony. Catherine took Charlotte's hand while George walked beside his father, with the dignity of someone who understood his important role in the family hierarchy. The doors swung open, and they stepped back into the brilliant London sunshine. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a wave of cheers and applause that seemed to roll down the street like thunder. Thousands of phones and cameras were raised simultaneously, creating a sea of tiny screens all focused on capturing this moment. The royal family paused at the top of the Abbey steps, allowing the photographers and crowd to get their pictures before beginning the walk back to their car. William waved with his free hand while holding Louis securely. Catherine's smile was radiant as she acknowledged the enthusiastic reception from people who had waited hours just to see them for these few precious minutes. As they made their way down the red carpet toward the waiting Range Rover, the same vehicle that had brought them safely through London's streets that morning, William felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had gone well. The children had represented the family beautifully, and the British people had once again shown their enduring affection for the monarchy. The car door closed behind them, muffling the sounds of the crowd, and they began their journey home to Kensington Palace. Another successful royal engagement was complete, another chapter added to the long story of the British monarchy, and another set of memories created for a family that belonged not only to each other, but to an entire nation.